Fantastic. Thank you for joining us, everyone, to the when, why, and how of case method in business education. My name is Lisa Leander. I'm the Member Services Officer with GBSN. I'm the main contact for business schools and our partners. For those joining us for the first time, I would like to give a little background on GBSN before we officially start the presentation. GBSN is a network of leading business schools working to improve management and business education in emerging markets. And we do this through both programs, networking events, and our GBSN Connect web portal. We do have 46 member schools representing 23 countries. Each business school goes through an application process and is engaged with our mission of improving business education in emerging markets. We do accept applications each quarter, and we'd be happy to discuss with you and if there's interest in participating in the webinar or participating as a member of GBSN and the activities that we run. And you're welcome to follow up with me for more information. Beyond our member schools, we also have partner organizations. These are listed some of the corporations and foundations that we work with through our business schools who share our vision of improving management education as an important part of international development. And these are many of the partners that we draw from for our internships, student projects, and other opportunities. An example of some of our activities is Case Method Month. This is what we're rolling out this September, highlighting and also sharing information on case method and case studies, all with a focus in emerging markets. You're currently part of our first webinar event, and I welcome you to join us on September 30th for mentoring case writers from inspiration to instruction. That will be at the same time at 10 a.m. in Washington, D.C. We will be sending out more information if you're interested in joining that webinar as well. We will also be starting a working group made up of faculty who will come together similar to this event to discuss and research case method and build together ideas and research around this topic. We'll also be highlighting case resources and case competitions. I invite you to log on to our website to learn more and share more information as well. I'm very pleased to have with us Marc Robinson of WDI and Richard McCracken, Director of ECCH, who will be moderating our session today. ECCH is a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting case method and management education. Richard has been the director since 2008. And prior to joining ECCH, he was the head of the intellectual property at Open University. Richard writes a monthly blog on his website discussing case method, and I encourage you to check it out on the ECCH website. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today, Richard.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be involved in this. I'd like to thank you and GBSN for the opportunity to be involved.
Wonderful. If you would like to go ahead and get us started.
ECCH, as Lisa says, through our case distribution. Supporting developing schools. The case method has many strengths, and this is a welcome opportunity to discuss some of those and to share them among a community of case writers and teachers worldwide. And forces them to confront the decision-making challenges that real business has to make every day. It aligns also faculty research with teaching, which is an important improvement issue for business schools, and engages faculty with their business communities both locally around the school and across borders. It also has a softer side in developing the social and soft skills development that are so valuable in presenting one's ideas in company, working with project teams, and working to solve problems collaboratively. None of this is easy, though. The case method makes strong demands of in business education. Marc is the director of GlobaLens, which is the publishing division of the William Davidson Institute at the University of Michigan. Marc joined the Institute in 2009 following careers in the US Air Force and college and university leadership. He has over 20 years of experience in operations and leadership, including at NATO, community organizations and not-for-profits, and has a real interest in adult learning and educational leadership. He has a BSc in Engineering and International Relations, an MSc in Strategic Intelligence, and a PhD in Higher Education Leadership. And I can't think of anyone I'd rather listen to on this topic. So at this moment, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Marc to take us through the rest of the presentation. And then afterwards, I look forward to following up on all your questions and having a really interesting discussion. Marc, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. I really appreciate those kind words, and I really appreciate Lisa helping to facilitate this from GBS on, and you agreeing to help moderate it. I'm really looking forward to the presentation. As Richard and Lisa have both said, if you do have questions, please send them in by text, and we'll try to address as many of them as possible. As typically happens in web seminars, there may be more questions than we can get to, but we will follow up with them after the webinar and make sure that everybody's questions are answered. So please, if you have any questions, please send them in. To get things started, we're going to test our technology here, and we wanted to do a quick poll. You know a little bit about me, so we're going to try to find out a little bit about the participants on the webinar today. Oh, good. I see it just came up. So if you can tell us who you are, what your background is, and hopefully Lisa will give me some indication that people are answering the questions.
I have about 80% who voted. I'll just give a few more minutes.
Perfect. Thank you, Lisa. Any of the information we have in the webinar today will be really applicable to students, professionals, or especially for professors. It looks like most of the people are professors. If you hopefully can see the answers to the poll results, about 75% of the 50 people we have on here right now are professors, 10% or so are staff and administration, about 10% students, and 10% in the professional or other categories. So that's fantastic. I'll make sure I can change my own slides here. There we go. We have one more poll for you. If you are a professor or faculty member, so about that 80% of you that answered, can you let us know about how many students you teach per semester? And we broke it into 5 or 4 categories here. You can see on the screen. As Richard said earlier, the case method is very demanding of students and teachers. We'll talk a little bit about how the role of the professor changes when you use case study teaching. Like Richard, I truly believe that case study teaching is among the most effective tools that a professor can use. I know myself, I am an action-based learner. I like to solve problems. And I think this is a really wonderful way to do that. Okay, so we've got the answers, the results to the poll up. It looks like about 60% of you teach 50 to 100 students or so, and another quarter between 100 and 200, and a very small percent more than 200 students in a semester. So thank you very much for answering the question. That helps me to hopefully tailor the presentation to you. And as I said, if you have questions, please send them in by text message. Okay, I'm not sure what just happened to my, there we go, okay. As Richard said, he gave you a little bit of my background. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but I've been at the William Davidson Institute as the director of GlobaLens. Internally, we call it educational outreach, for about 2.5 years now. In that time, we've seen case study use rise by about 400% as measured by our sales as well as polling our faculty at the Ross School of Business. We've written about 250 case studies in those 2 years. Currently have near 400 case studies in our catalog. Formerly, I've been involved in higher education. Even when I was a military officer, I was constantly involved in building and refining the curricula that trains the United States military in many different areas. And I have always found myself drawn to education. So let me give you an overview of what we'll talk about today. So GlobaLens, which is our organization that publishes case studies and other teaching materials. I'll go a little bit into teaching and learning theory because, as Richard said, it's demanding on the instructors to teach cases, and it helps to know how especially adults approach learning. And then we'll discuss the case method. Okay, so any good professor has to have objectives at the beginning of the presentation. You don't have to memorize these. These are the things I hope to cover in about the next 25 minutes. But I'd like you to understand and be able to describe how adults learn, what action-based learning is, and how case study learning fits into that. Be able to explain how case studies can assist adults especially in their learning, how the instructor's approach to teaching will be different than from a lecture, and then identify some resources that will help you get started in teaching case studies, and then hopefully we can get you interested in writing and publishing case studies as well. GlobaLens, which is my department at the William Davidson Institute, was started about 4 years ago as a case writing partner to the University of Michigan's Business School. We focused initially on case writing. We got more into the publication of our materials, and then increasingly into publishing materials that we receive from professors not at the Ross Business School. We found that there's very few outlets, us and ECCH notably, that will publish professionally written materials for schools that do not traditionally have that type of an outlet. Like ECCH, we market to educators around the world. We've seen a very large growth in the adoption of our materials. I'm sure ECCH has seen the same. Our catalog has tended to focus on some niche areas of social impact, base of the pyramid or bottom of the pyramid, business principles, and entrepreneurship. I think we're doing the right things and doing them well. Just this last year, the department was awarded the University of Michigan's Provost Teaching Innovation Prize, which is a tremendous accomplishment and a reflection on everybody that's involved in writing and teaching case studies at the University of Michigan. We've had several Oikos case writing competition winners, including the first and third place in the 2011 competition. And then with a partner at the William Davidson Institute, we have sponsored the Next Billion Case Writing Competition. We do publish all of the winning cases. We will be doing that again sometime very soon. You should see an announcement. And we've been fortunate enough to have a couple of case studies not written by our staff, but by professors that do not normally write case studies win in the Next Billion Case Writing Competition. So let me jump into how adults learn. And I'll go very quickly through this. Hopefully you can see on the left side there's a triangle. At the bottom is the word knowledge, and then it goes up through comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. And adults tend to focus on application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. As most of you probably know from teaching your students, they almost always want to know the reason for learning something. They don't like learning things in the abstract. They want a purpose or a reason. They want some kind of a foundation, including the experience around the learning activities, which is one place case studies are fantastic teaching opportunities because they do give you the experience and the context for the adult learner. Adults want to be responsible for the decisions in their education. They want to co-create. They want to tailor the learning to the kinds of things that they're interested in, to solving the problems that they're seeing specifically. You probably have seen your students take something that you've taught 1 week, and the next week they'll come back and tell you how they applied that specific principle or skill to a problem that they faced in the previous week. And that's a typical pattern with adult learners. They want that skill to be immediately impactful in their lives, so they want readiness. They like problem-centered materials rather than content-oriented. So younger learners are generally satisfied with reading long pages about a history section or about education theory. When you get to adults, they tend to want the problem-based activities. They want to see what the theory is and how it was applied. And then they tend to be much more internally motivated versus externally motivated. So they want to learn because they're trying to improve their own situation. They've got problems that they want to face, and they really want to minimize the amount of time that they have to spend on their education. They know they want to get better. They're balancing education with a lot of other things. So that brings us to the teaching learning continuum. What I have termed teaching tools are what you tend to associate with a lecture-based format. Most of the communication is one way, with the instructor giving information, providing content, explaining things. I've heard this referred to as the sage on the stage model, with the instructor being in front of the room, really just providing the lecture. The student is viewed more as a passive receiver of knowledge, and I like the metaphor that this type of teaching and learning is like a play. The actor, the professor, is the center of the attention. The students are watching what's going on, but they're really not involved, and there really isn't a lot else going on backing the instructor up. He or she is resting on their well-earned and well-deserved expertise. Learning tools, on the other hand, force the instructor to do things a little differently. It becomes more student-focused, much more interaction-focused. The metaphor that I like, or the phrase I like to use, is guide on the side. You're prompting the students to build their own knowledge, to question themselves, and to identify situations where they can create the learning outcomes and activities. This is more like a video game. There's an awful lot that goes into the preparation of building the learning event. So on the professor side, he or she is relying on technology, on perhaps movies, on a lot more content than a traditional textbook. And then the student is participating in the event and is causing things to change, but there's boundaries to what they can cause to change, exactly like a video game. Case studies, if you hopefully saw that change on the slide, really provide an excellent opportunity for shifting the educational experience more to the learning. They're inherently action-based. They're inherently focused on a problem. They inherently cause the students to be active in the learning process. Again, far more work for the students, and as you will learn, or you may already know if you are using case studies, a little more complex for the instructor as well. And it's experiential learning, so they're actually solving problems. Well-written case studies that use outside experts coming from industry frequently will be able to attract those industry leaders to the class and have them participate in the case study analysis, and you'll see real problem solving. The students are exceptionally talented and exceptionally creative at looking at problems through a different lens than the traditional decision makers and problem solvers may have looked at them before. So I want to make sure everybody is still paying attention. So we have another poll, and I'd like to just know which phrase best describes your current experience with case studies. So it looks like the poll is open, and good. And we've got a few more participants in the web seminar. So if you missed the first poll, please do answer this one. It will help craft the remaining part of the presentation. Okay, it doesn't look like there's been very many questions. Perhaps as we start getting more into the case writing part of this, there will be some more questions, but please don't be shy. There really are, to use the phrase, no stupid questions, and we would love to answer anything that you have to ask. There's an amazing amount of expertise on the line between ECCH, GBSN, and myself, and this is a really good opportunity. If you've had questions that you'd like to have answered, we would love to do that for you.
Mark, I'm sorry, are you not able to see the poll results?
I am not, for some reason. I could see the first couple, and I can't see these.
Okay. Well, we have about 44% that teach using case studies but have not been trained. 20% that are currently teaching case studies and have been trained to do so. 34% plan to teach more case studies and would like more information, and 2% are students who use case studies.
Okay. And those numbers again were like 40, 20,
about
34?
44% are using case studies but have not been trained.
Okay.
Majority.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks so much, Lisa. Okay, so for the majority of you that have not used or not been trained in the case method, hopefully this will be some new information. For those of you that have been trained in the case method, this will be largely a review, but hopefully you'll learn something new as well. So to begin with, I want to really clearly define what a business case study is. It's a teaching tool. It is inherently told by a story about a particular situation that is faced by a particular organization. That's not to say that it can't be fictionalized, because it can, but the students are very quick to pick up on a case study that, that has fictional elements in it. The case study is designed to be solved through classroom discussion. There, in the best case studies, there is no right answer. There's no obvious solution for the students to grab onto, and you want to aim for about 50 or 60% of the students arriving at one solution and the balance of the students arriving at another, and really generate a good discussion. Case studies differ, teaching case studies differ from case study as a research methodology in that there is a central decision point, a dilemma, or a problem that is faced by a particular figure in the case study. We call this figure the protagonist. That person is typically a CEO or a high-ranking participant in the organization. Another key element is that the protagonist is forced to make a decision or solve a dilemma or make a recommendation in a particular time frame. This is really important because it limits the amount of information that you need to bring to the case to the information that the protagonist had at the time when they were being forced to make the decision. We're frequently asked about bias in a teaching case study. On the whole, you want the case study to be as free from bias as you can. You don't want it to be a marketing pamphlet for the organization. You don't want it to highlight only things that went right. But you can introduce bias through the central figure. Each individual CEO, each individual decision maker in an organization will have things that he or she believes, things that he or she wants to focus on, information that he or she might discount that others would not. And those things can and should be brought into the case study, and you should make your students understand that everybody has their own unique outlook on the problem or dilemma to be faced. What a case is not is just as important as what a case is. So it's not just a summary of events that happen at a company. It's not a research paper. An important element of a business case study is it stops short of providing the solution to the problem. So you lead the students from the solution, or pardon me, from the problem through the background to how the organization got to the predicament they were in, and then you conclude with a restatement of the problem without giving the students the right answer. And again, it's not a marketing tool for a featured organization. Usually the case studies do highlight things that ultimately went well for an organization, but not always. In fact, I'll tell you that most students will prefer case studies where things might not have gone quite so perfectly. And ironically, those are the kinds of skills that organizations that hire business school graduates really want. They want students that can operate in imperfect information and make difficult decisions and identify when a decision might not be the best possible solution. Those are also the ones that are the most difficult to write. I will tell you that as well. There is a couple of case method formats. One is called the classic case study, which, as I said earlier, is organized around a problem or a challenge. It's a detailed description of the real situation. They're very intensive. You try to give as holistic a view of the situation as you can, sometimes through the voice of advisors to the protagonist. So maybe somebody from the human resources department or the accounting department, or from a legal point of view where they're giving input about the situation but leaving it up to the protagonist to make the to make the decision. And there's always this element of time. You want to limit the decision to a specific point in time, and you want to limit the information available to what the protagonist had at the time that the decision was made. The classic case study is someplace usually between 12 and 20 or 25 pages. They're quite lengthy. They're very detailed. You do have the option of creating a short case study, or sometimes called a mini case or a caselet. These tend to be much shorter. The discussion about them is much less complex. Usually 10 to 20 minutes of classroom discussion time, or a well thought out, well-reasoned, highly complex case study might even extend over 2 complete teaching sessions. So I want to move over to the professor's actions when you're teaching a case study. So you've got this, this product that gives a dilemma. It's putting the students in the role of the protagonist to solve a question or solve a problem or answer a question. So the professor's actions don't become saying yes or no, or saying the information the students present is accurate or inaccurate, but it becomes one of, again, that guiding on the side, clarifying questions, asking students what do they mean by that, make them define terms that might be somewhat fuzzy. You want to challenge their assumptions. We have some professors here at the University of Michigan that teach a really good module on corruption, and they talk about you know, everybody always starts with the idea that corruption is always inherently bad. And then you get to, well, in a humanitarian disaster, when you've got people trying to take advantage of the situation and they're demanding bribes to let you bring in aid to an area that, that has been struck with a disaster, that's a form of corruption. If you know that the only way to get the aid to the people that really need it is to participate in the corruption and the corrupting activities, is that wrong? And that starts to get students to challenge their assumptions. You want to get the students to provide evidence for the things that they're saying. You want to make them build a case for why their point of view is right. You ask them what their reasons are for stating a particular thing. And then finally, you want to ask them, how can we find out what the consequences are? So if you pick a particular course of action, play it out for the students. Try to poke holes in it. Try to take it to a dead end that's not the conclusion that they wanted it to be, and make them go back and reframe their argument, re-challenge their own assumptions. I think you'll find once you start doing that a few times and the students get used to it, they will start challenging each other. They also will challenge themselves. They'll get to a particular point and say, wow, I really hadn't thought of where this was going. I need to think through this some more. Several case instructors think about the structure of teaching a case as guiding the students into pastures. The three big pastures, if you can think of the way livestock is herded through a series of pastures, is for the students to go and discover the initial concepts. Frequently these are things that need to be defined, assumptions that need to be clarified, just real foundational knowledge about a model or a theory or a language. And then they're presented with the problem. Frequently the problem will be something like the CEO needs to go and do a presentation to the board of directors about some particular need. So the immediate problem is, what does the CEO say? But hidden in that problem, once they can identify the problem, are some other problems. How do you get the information from the different parts of your organization? Are there political considerations within the organization or cultural considerations within the organization? You start to get the students to see the real problem, which is not just the stated, I need to go make a presentation. And then finally, the most powerful part of the case analysis is to get them to generalize. So you looked at a particular problem at a particular protagonist's point of view at his or her organization, but you want to see if there's a way to get the problem that was solved at a cellular telephone company in rural India, can you take that same solution to a cellular telephone company in Europe, in the United States? If another example, if you've solved a customer service challenge at a large organization in the United States, can you use the same concepts to solve the same problem in China? And then you'll get a much richer discussion. There are a lot of advantages to the case method. I've listed just a few of them here. They're very personal to the students. They really grab on to the protagonist. They want to make the best decision possible for that person. The good case studies really grip the students with an urgent need. They're very realistic. You'll see students really take on the roles. If you can craft or use a complex case study over several days, you will see the same challenges that organizations face when building cross-functional teams. Case studies also tend to be very specific, so you can hone in on the information in a particular teaching discipline, so you can make it accounting specific, or you can also use the same case study and make it business strategy specific. They're experiential, which means you put the students in the role of solving the problem. And then they're analytical, they're logical, they're great teamwork opportunities, and you can pick the teams of the students to maximize effectiveness or maximize their ability to build skills which may not be present. And they're great communications opportunities. Things that have been leveled as disadvantages of case studies is they're too specific. They're one particular problem at one particular place. They're a post hoc experience. You're commenting after something has already happened. Frequently, students will look for the real solution, what actually happened at a particular organization, and they'll try to bring that as the right solution. So professors need to be prepared. And then finally, it's a truncated experience. Just by the necessity of being contained in a class session or 2 class sessions, you as the professor will have to cut off the discussion at some point. Very quickly through the case development process, this is not the difficulty. You need to identify your teaching objectives. This is the most overlooked, most critical, most complex step in the case development process. I've got another slide on this, so I will dwell on it in a minute. You need to gather information from credible sources and create an outline. Write your drafts. Ensure that your citations are accurate in this fast-moving social media and electronic age. Grabbing the date and time something was said is increasingly important. And then finally, the publishing step, which is for us a professional editing and formatting process, and then marketing it worldwide, which is a service we offer. So the teaching objectives, like I said, are the most difficult and time-consuming part of the initial case writing process. To make it as simple as possible, we work with the professors here to get them to complete this sentence. After discussing this case, the students will be able to, and then fill in the blank. If you pick an action verb that's at the higher end of that learning domain, so things like defend or justify or explain, determine, compare, contrast, analyze, you get more comprehensive and complex case studies. So some examples from a recent case study that we wrote, you can read hopefully on the screen. After discussing the case studies, the students will be able to empathize with the frustration felt by urban residents using transportation in cities around the world. So they need to be able to define it and describe it before they can empathize it. Assess business opportunities for this particular organization's integrated mobility hub. And then finally, make a pitch for the Los Angeles Hub project to an investment firm. There's the task that the CEO was given, but you need the students to solve all those other things before they can get to the point of making that pitch. Another very important portion of the teaching case study is the teaching note. And this is to give other instructors the opportunity to teach your case study and give them the background that they need to feel confident in front of a class. There's 4 major components you can see here: the overview, the purpose, the analysis, which is the longest part, and the pedagogy, which gets into how adults learn. How are they going to apply this immediately? What kinds of things is the instructor going to do to foster those learning interactions? I've got 4 very brief sections here. I will go over these rather quickly. I want to be aware of the time. The overview gives the comprehensive overview, the context, setting, situation, and characters. Oh, and I cut out the rest of the slide, so I apologize. The analysis is where you will spend the most time if you write a teaching note. It explains what you want students to do, what pastors you want the students to walk through, what things you want them to learn, where they might be distracted, what principles and theories you want them to bring in. That's the meat of the teaching note. It's, if you think of it from another instructor's point of view, it's what they would need to teach that case effectively in their own classrooms. These are traditionally highly protected by professors. We make them only available to people that we know and can verify are professors from our website because they give the quote-unquote solution to solving the case study. So finally, I want to talk about distribution. You can distribute case studies yourself. This is probably what 70% of educators do. They write a case study, they pass it out to their students. I would argue, and I think Richard would agree with me, that there's a market for these far beyond your own individual teaching. So there are some other distributors. Harvard is not likely to distribute a case study unless you are teaching or affiliated with them, and the Ivy School of Business is the same. ECCH and us at the University of Michigan will distribute well-written case studies. We have a publication process that we can explain in more detail. Richard, I'm sure, can give you some more information. Our information is on our website, which you can see there is globalens.com. And we would be happy to help you. We're finding more and more need for case studies written from different points of view, specifically in emerging economies with that kind of a voice. So as I said, our submission material is on our website. We put the materials through a two-tiered process of review, and then at the end of the process we do pay a 25% royalty on the revenues above the cost it takes to get the case study published. So finally, I've got one last webinar question and then a conclusion. I find it immensely helpful for people to leave a presentation thinking about what they're going to do differently after they've participated. So I'd like you to think through whether you would be most likely to download and read a case study from a site like ecch. It looks like we're having a little technology problem, and I'll apologize for that. Whether you would read a case study, whether you would adopt a case study into your own teaching, whether you would investigate more about how to teach using case studies through webinars or professional development, or some other action. And I really would like you to take a concrete step towards adding case studies into your teaching. And I see we've added join the GBSN webinar on case mentoring on September 30th as a potential choice. So if you could take a moment to answer those questions, we can wrap the presentation up as soon as we have some answers to the poll questions, and then Richard and I would be happy to take any questions that you might have. Okay, good. I see about 60% of you will investigate more about how to use case studies. About a third will adopt a case study. A quarter will download and read a case study. Those of you that are in the other category, and those of you who are going to investigate more about how to use case studies, I do encourage you to download and read through a couple of case studies and really see how that would be a different approach to teaching. Take one concrete step as a result of the seminar today.
Great, thank you so much, Mark. And Richard, if you'd like to go ahead and lead the question and answer portion of the webinar.
Okay, yeah, thanks Lisa, and thanks very much Mark. That was really, really terrific overview over a very broad area. The first question I've got from our online contributions is, are there any drawbacks to this from the student perspective? Do they get the same kind of positive feedback from this method as from the direct lecturing method, where they know that each week they're making some kind of progress, or do they feel a little bit at sea? And if they do, how do you counteract that as a teacher?
So the answer is it depends. In all honesty, this can be a little challenging for students, and they do need some more guidance. There's a lot of negative perceptions, particularly in movies in Hollywood, about the case teaching method as being very confrontational, being very adversarial. But I would argue that the best case teachers are very supportive and very nurturing. You do need to go out of your way to ask those good questions and give them good feedback. There is nothing to preclude at the end of a case discussion having the students submit something that looks like a traditional writing project. So after the case discussion in the class, how would you actually solve the problem? And then that can be graded the same way you grade a normal teaching assignment. Richard, do you have an opinion about that as well?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's also something that stays with you. Thinking back to my first experience of a case teaching session, being part of it, I was tremendously energized by it all, and that enthusiasm stayed with me. And also the methodology itself. I mean, looking at, let's say, draw an analogy with the experience of law students. Even if law students don't practice law, they still have with them that logical way of analyzing data and coming to a solution. And I think the same applies for people who've experienced the case method. Actually, as they go forward into business life, then it's not something that they lose. Information which is just given to you, you can forget quite easily, but actually having lived through the process of working with cases, it's a real technique that I think is a very useful skill, and one which stays with you when you go into business life.
Yeah, I completely agree, Richard. That was a really, really good point. And I know from my own bias and my own learning, I learn well with case studies and other problem-based formats, and I find myself continually looking for what's the real problem in the situation I'm facing.
Now our next question is this. Coming from an Ivy League school, David knows how effective, lively and meaningful is a case study. However, teaching in the last 5 years, he's been working in a state school with a very diverse student body where 65% of the students have English as not their native language, and many come from cultures that don't encourage decision making. So he wonders if the case method really fits all type of environments and student bodies. Have you got any thoughts on that, Mark?
I do. That's a really, really great question. And I would say the simple answer is it does, because the end product that we offer as educators to the workforce is graduates who have the skills necessary to make these kind of decisions and lead teams and foster cohesion once they graduate. You know, so you take a student at the bachelor's level from the high school learning experience, and 4 years later or 5 years later, you put them into the workforce. And similarly, you take a student with some amount of work experience, and 2 years later or 3 years later, you put them back into the workforce with an MBA. And these are the kind of challenges that they're going to face. I would say that as an instructor, you need to work very hard to identify who is in your class. What are the demographics and what are the challenges and barriers you're going to face? Putting some intentional thought about your seating chart, which is something that frequently we don't think about in higher education, but putting groups of students together for a real purpose, to bolster somebody's English skills, to bolster their analysis and public speaking skills. You can adjust your grading criteria to reflect the analysis over the speaking part, to solving the problem over the writing part. There's a lot of things that an instructor can do to adjust to the realities, but I would say it's a big barrier to really honestly identify who is in your class and what some of the limitations are likely to be. I've taught a large set of diverse students in the military and in community colleges and at universities, and the challenges are different at all three, but the outcome still remains the same. Whoever graduates from your program has to have the skills needed to survive and thrive, and I would say in this world that we're in, we need to be developing people that can not only operate in this kind of an environment, but change the world for the better. So I hope you would adopt these and do that extra bit of work, and I will fully recognize it is extra work in a situation not at an Ivy League school.
Yeah, no, I agree, absolutely agree. Now moving on to our next question. Ali says that he likes to spend some time talking about learning with cases with his students when he meets them for the first time. and wonders if we know of a short video, say 10 to 15 minutes maximum, on the benefits of the case method from a student perspective. I don't know of one offhand, but we do have many materials that are helpful to students coming to cases on our own website at ECCH. I'm sure Mark does at his website as well, and if you come to www.ecch.com, then you'll find an area on the site that's dedicated to students, and will have materials that they will find useful.
Yeah, exactly, Richard. We've got materials on our website available too. We have an enormous number of very talented and energetic students here, and I'm sure that if we gave them the project of videotaping that in the students' voices for professors to show, they would come through. So I'll make the commitment that we'll get a video up on our website fairly quickly. It might not be pretty and Hollywood produced, but it'll be authentic.
Oh, great. Well, that's the result already. Now, I've got a couple of questions that I think are related here. One is about the kind of optimum class size for teaching cases, and then linked to that is, could we talk a little bit about how we grade and assess student contributions in class? I think that's one for you, Mark.
So the optimum size, I mean, clearly as an instructor, it's difficult to manage class sizes which are above 40 or 50 for individual attention. But we have quite a history here, and other case schools do as well, of breaking very large sections into teams, so you can effectively manage a case discussion by selecting teams. So you might have 150 students in a class, but they've got 5-person teams, so you're dealing with 30 teams. You can assign roles within a team or have them select roles within the team to be a particular content expert. We run a challenge here, I guess. It's called the Leadership Crisis Challenge in partnership with the Ross Leadership Institute, which takes about 100 to 150 students in 4-person teams through a 2-day crisis seminar, really, where they're participating as an executive team. And it's not unmanageable. So you need to be creative about how you divide up the teams and what you as a particular instructor can pay attention to in terms of feedback and guidance. But the other teams also are a resource to providing feedback and guidance, I would say, as well. So I know there was a second part to that question, Richard, and I lost it.
It was to do with assessing and grading student participation in the class discussion.
Right. So again, rubrics and grading criteria are wonderful tools for an instructor because they let you emphasize what's important from your teaching. You can tailor the grading criteria to fit the things that you believe to be important or missing in the student's experience. If it's the public speaking component, you can emphasize that. If it's the writing component, you can emphasize that. I would say it's an area that you need to be creatively flexible. I don't know how else to put it, because once you put grading criteria out to a group of students, it's enormously difficult to change that criteria, especially in the context of one course. But I think if you communicate it well and emphasize what you want to the students to get out of it, I think you'll be surprised that the students will put their effort in the places where you think it's important for them to learn. I'm a firm believer in giving the students the grading criteria before an exercise or before any kind of a graded activity, because it's part of the learning process. Again, going back to the way adults learn, they want to know why. They want to know what it is that they're supposed to be doing to get the most out of the learning activity.
I'm going to take one last question because we've almost finished the hour now, and while I'm asking this question, perhaps Lisa could give us some guidance on how much time we do have left before we finish.
Sure, let's go ahead and take one last question and then wrap it up. And then if people do want to stay, I see we have a number of questions coming in. If people do want to stay on to have a few more of these questions, then you're welcome to stay on, but we will officially close at 11. So Richard, if you'd like to take one last question, then wrap it up.
Yeah, we'll just take one last question and then wrap up. But the discussion will stay online for anyone who wants to remain and talk about some of the outstanding questions that are left. And the question is this: we've focused a lot on business schools and working with students at business schools. But how adaptable, Marc, do you think the method is for other environments? Let's say the question is around a not-for-profit NGO which is trying to teach its staff how an approach to health systems strengthening has been implemented. So they're thinking of using perhaps a more descriptive case study that provides a full picture. And the question is, how can case studies be adapted for staff who aren't students per se to better understand an approach that this organization wants to use across the organization and staff there?
Well, like Richard said, I think in general, I think case studies are adaptable across almost every discipline. I have a hard time thinking of any function that a graduate would go into that's not related to a teaching discipline and where that person, once they graduate, wouldn't be solving problems. So in general, I think the case approach is very transportable. We focus a lot on the business school because, frankly, that's where our institute is focused. But I think Richard is also right that it sounds like this organization is looking more at a descriptive study as a reason to explain how they got to the solution that they got to. It can potentially be more powerful to build the case study in the traditional teaching case study format and have the students arrive at that solution. But students are very perceptive and aware of being nudged, I guess, in a particular direction. And if they don't believe that it's the correct or appropriate decision, they will fight it and may leave feeling like they got railroaded. So I would say if it depends on the educational objective. If you want the participants to learn why something happened in a historical context, then a descriptive case study is appropriate. If you want them to learn how to solve a problem, or maybe say once the decision was made to go with this particular system, how do you solve the related problems that come along with it? Because any decision, no matter how good it is going to create other challenges down the line. And you could focus a teaching case study on those points for staff development purposes.
That's great. Thank you very much, Marc. Well, it's my difficulty and pleasure to try and summarize the discussion and also Marc's presentation. And I'll just pick out a few points that particularly I thought were prominent. The first is how Marc described what is a case, and also very importantly, what isn't a case. So the case method and the cases are active and engaging and problem solving and experiential. And what they're not is very obvious, is they're not just a summary of events, and neither are they a research paper. And a couple of the questions coming in that we weren't able to address, which may be better answered actually in the case mentoring workshop, so I'd encourage people to join for that as well, is that there is a difference between a research paper and a teaching case. And I think that is around a very important point that Marc made, which is how the case leads from a problem to a predicament and then back to a restatement of the problem. that really sums it up for me, is that students aren't allowed to escape from that circle. There isn't an easy solution. There isn't a single right answer. And the role, and that takes me on to the role of the professor, which is the professor is a guide to developing the discussion, to force definitions, to challenge assumptions, and to provide evidence but not to provide outright solutions, and to force students to examine the consequences of the decisions that they take as a result of working on the case. That brings me to perhaps the most important point of all, which is that employers want students who have case skills, that all the skills that are developed and exercised in the course of working with cases are the ones that are valued most in the workplace. And you know, employers aren't daft. They can see the value in the skills that are developed in the case method, and I think those of us engaged today and in this webinar recognize them as well, but it would be great if we could spread that awareness even further. So the advantages of the case method are that it's realistic, it's experiential, its possible disadvantages, which I thought Marc was very honest in engaging with, is that there's an accusation that cases can be too specific, that we can be looking for a real solution, and that students confuse what actually happened in real life with being a right solution, and that time is limited. But I think that with the right approach, those disadvantages or potential disadvantages can be handled and anticipated by experienced and aware case teachers. And case writers can help as well by identifying the teaching objectives before they write the case. I think there the importance of the teaching note can't be overemphasized. It's really important that those learning and teaching objectives are identified so that they are translated into the teaching note, and that provides guidance both for users of the case when they're teaching it in the classroom, but also for the case writer themselves, because if you've identified your teaching objectives, then that helps you structure and write a really good, solid case. And the last thing I'd say before wrapping up is that actually I think there's one thing which we've missed, which is that distributing your case it does more than simply spread your case and make it available as a teaching resource for people in other schools. I think it also actively involves you in building your own reputation as an academic and the reputation of your school. And I see a lot of feedback coming back to us from people who distribute through us, recognizing the value that taking the name of the school and distributing it to other schools worldwide brings both to the school and to the writer, and not just reputationally, but in stimulating other opportunities to do research, to start to write cases around that research. That enhances the classroom the classroom experience of the students. It then enhances the reputation of the school. It helps to align teaching and research, I think, in that process, and it provides something that's useful for the company around which you have written the case. So there are just wins all around that. And I'd just like to thank Marc for giving us such a knowledgeable and descriptive and full tour around the complete case process. I found it very enjoyable. Thank you for your questions as well. They were very stimulating. And thanks very much to Lisa and Paige at GBSN, because this has been a terrific afternoon. Thank you again.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marc and Richard, for joining us, and thank you for all the participants. As a reminder, this is Case Method Month for GBSN, so I encourage you to come look at our resources. A lot of the resources that Marc and Richard mentioned about ECCH, GlobaLens, also a few others to think about, Emerald Publishing, Harvard Business School, some of their case competitions. They're all on our website at this time. If you have a resource that you would like to highlight, we'd be happy to add it as well. I also encourage you to join us on September 30th, Friday at 10 a.m. EDT for our case mentoring, where we look at sort of the other side of cases, and those are those supporting the writing and development of cases. I am going for those. We still have about 40 people with us today. We are going to stay on to answer a few more questions, but at this time, the webinar is officially ended. So those who do have more meetings today, you're welcome to leave. But for those who have a few more questions, the written ones we will go ahead and also respond to by email so everyone can have response to those. At this time, I would like to take a few people off of mute. If you would like to ask a question to Marc or Richard by raising your hand, again, clicking on the hand tool, I can take you off of mute and we can have continue the dialogue after the webinar has ended. So if anyone would like to go ahead and raise their hand, I'd be happy to take you off of mute at this time. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again. Let's see, Richard, I don't have anyone raising their hand, so maybe you'd like to ask maybe one or two more of the questions that came in. That we had some great questions come in.
Yes. We asked, where can I have some free case studies for teaching? Well, certainly we've got some free collections and some free cases available on our site, and there are a number of other sources as well. I'm not sure about Marc's site. Have you got free content on yours as well, Marc?
We make it free for the instructors to evaluate it. In all honesty, we've been exploring ways to identify regions where we should make content available for free. I know that that the Ivy School of Business has some agreements to make case studies available for free in a hard copy format. So if you go to their website and look, they have guidelines for how to apply for that. So other than strictly free content, it's very difficult to create case content, and we have a hard time justifying it, making it available generally for free.
Yeah, that's a good point. That it's easy to most case studies can be viewed and inspected online free, and the difference between that and actually free to use. But I think you should find those easily obtainable. Here's another question, which looks at the problem of using cases that you presented the year before or have used for a couple of years. How can I inhibit students from copying from prior years? This is word of mouth from one student intake to another.
That's a really great question, and a lot of the answer is in motivating the students to want to complete the exercise. You know, friends of mine that are education theorists and researchers will tell you that if the student took the time to track down the answer and prep the answer and prepare the answer, even if they didn't come up with everything exclusively on their own, they probably learned the content that you wanted them to learn. But I try very hard to give them a reason to want to solve the problem. Like everybody that teaches, I will admit that plagiarism can be a problem, but I'm not sure that it's quite the problem that we sometimes think it is. It takes some effort. So adjusting the objectives, adjusting the focus, changing one small aspect of a case study, asking the students to focus on, if there's a financial component, to focus on a different financial component sometimes is enough to get the students to not use previous solutions. Yeah. And then being very clear about your policy for what happens if you determine that they did in fact use material that they didn't come up with on their own. I think that's an important part too, just being very clear on your criteria and your expectations.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Now a couple of complex questions, and that finishes them. I think the list that we've got. The first one is around you spoke a little bit, Marc, about short cases and longer, perhaps more traditional cases. This question looks at the volume of factual detail and says, does the sheer volume of factual detail add value to the student learning? Harvard itself has started to develop so-called brief cases, which are much shorter versions. And this is from Chandru, who says that they themselves teach 13 cases in a full-length semester. Long cases add texture, but do the additional details really add to the student learning? And what's the delta ROI between short versus long cases? I don't know the answer to that, except to say that both long and short cases are used, and that short cases, I think, are not necessarily less complex. They may be faster to read them, but and certainly in exec ed courses they're popular for that reason. But Mark, have you got any thoughts about the relative complexity of short and long, and what the complexity adds?
It's a great question, and it's something that we face every day in our case writing initiatives here. We've got 3 full-time case writers that that work on different complexity levels of cases, and I would say that Richard's entirely correct that the length of the case has some but not complete impact on the complexity of it. Shorter cases may tend to lead the students to look up additional information on their own, which may mean it is not really a shorter case, it's just a shorter product. But the complexity is there, and then the students wind up doing more work outside of the context of the case study. You can add information to a case study purely to lead students down a particular path that may be an erroneous decision. I can name hundreds of case studies that do that, and I'm not going to judge the right or the wrongness of that because it depends, again, on the objectives that the case was written for. The good case studies decide where to put the information. It can be in the introduction to the case where it's explaining the situation. It can be in the background to the case, complex data, competitors' data, anecdotes about how things happen in a particular company frequently wind up in exhibits, which are appendices onto a case, all of which are really important. I think a lot of short cases just cut off the appendices and exhibits in the back and leave the 4 to 6 page version of a case, but then you lose the context of the additional material. So as Richard said, it's a very complex question. I would start with looking at the objectives that the case was written for and whether that matches the objectives that you want to teach for, because students will read 20-page case studies if they're interested and they see the reason. And they also will avoid reading 5-page case studies if they don't see the reason and the applicability. So, I hate to say it depends, but I'm going to say it again.
Well, the next question I'm definitely going to say it depends, and this is one for you, Mark, just to give you advance notice, because I'm not even going to try and give an answer to this one. This is a really interesting question from Dana, and she's wondering what recommendations you would have for a team that's approaching a research project, which in this case is an assessment of a public-private partnership, with the primary purpose of developing a case study for teaching. Are the things the team ought to build into the research, design, and interviews and analysis to tease out meaningful teaching themes? So the relationship between research and writing a teaching case.
Absolutely. There are things that you'll want to build in into the research design. We've worked on a couple of projects in that specific way. If you have, I don't know if Dana is still on the line, if she has the ability to raise her hand and get on here on audio. I'll try to answer the question to the best of my ability, but without some feedback from her, it might be
Dana
difficult.
is on the line. I can go ahead and unmute her. She's raised her hand. Hello, Dana. Can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
Hi, Dana.
Hi. Where are you calling from today?
I'm calling from the Global Health Leadership Institute at Yale University.
Great. Thank you for joining us. And Mark, I'll let you answer her question.
Okay. Hi, Dana. If you've got an idea of what the situation you want to build the case study around, if you know kind of the story and who the protagonist will be, getting videotape footage of that and generating almost a journalistic set of interview questions and documenting the answers to those is very important. You don't want to upset your research methodology just to build the case study, but you want to gather as much information from the protagonist's point of view that you can, what he or she is thinking, what's weighing on him or her, whether there's a priority to the decisions that needs to be made. Frequently we've seen in some of the healthcare related case studies that we've worked on that there might be a budget for one thing and it's enormously difficult to change the money to cover other costs, so they'll let something fail even when there seems to be money in the budget to cover that. And drawing out those details from the protagonist about what he or she is facing, what is keeping him or her up at night, won't frequently wind up in an academic research paper, but are what makes a real teaching case study come to life for the students. So did that help at all, or is there more information that I can give you?
I guess, so it sounds really what you're talking about is building a case from the perspective of one person. I guess that would be your recommendation, whereas we've been looking at it from an organizational perspective, what groups might be thinking as they go into building a partnership model.
Okay, so if you're talking about a teaching case study, which is what we've been discussing for the webinar,
Yeah.
I don't know if you were on early, but a teaching case study is different than a descriptive case study because it really does take on the point of view of one person. Each of those groups will have somebody making a decision.
Right.
So you can write a rather more complex case study that tells the story from 4 or 5 different points of view, and maybe even has competing, hidden agenda interests that I would say if that is there, that's detail you discover is more appropriate in the teaching notes, or to create almost like a profile for the different people in the organizations that are part of the decision-making process. It would lend itself really well to to a role-playing where you have 4 or 5 people who have to come together as this team in an academic teaching setting and make whatever decision is in front of them. And if they've got things that they want to ensure happen or things that they want to prevent happening, and they don't necessarily want the other people that are participating to know they have those biases, that can make for great discussion.
Okay.
But it's information to gather up front and ahead of time and document it, and then be very clear what you want public, because once you create a case study, that material is published, and it'll have the weight of your institution and your team members' name attached to it, and you don't want to create problems for your own research, but you want to tell as accurate a story as you can. So sometimes that more sensitive information winds up clearly identified in the teaching note for instructors' eyes only, and then they can share it in the context of the teaching however they see fit.
I guess that would be my concern in writing something, from a particular person's point of view, especially if it's going to mean casting blame on someone, but I suppose that is kind of the point.
It's, yeah, you don't, well, I wouldn't want to write a case study that cast blame on a particular person, but this might be a point where you can identify somebody one level above this group of people that is the team has to present a decision to, and it has to be a unified decision to take some action or to solve some problem. And you can fictionalize that part of it. If there's a point of view that maybe would balance, if there's a one person that's in this group that is particularly difficult to deal with or particularly strident in their opinions, you can create a fictional member of the team to kind of counterbalance that without detracting from the case much.
Okay, that's great. That's good advice.
So hopefully you've got our email address. If there's other questions we can answer for you, I'd be happy to help you out.
Thank you. It's very helpful.
Oh, my pleasure, Dana.
Great, Richard, Mark. It looks like now it's about 11:20, so we're going to let everyone go. I'll officially close out the webinar. Again, we'll be sending out our contact information. If you'd like to follow up with Mark or Richard directly as well, that will be included along with the presentation. So thank you again so much for joining us today, and thank you, Richard and Mark, for a wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you, Lisa, and Richard. Thank you very much.
All right, enjoy the rest of the week,
Lisa.
everyone. Great, thanks for joining us. I'm officially going to conclude the presentation.